The King and the Wise Man, a tale of hidden blessing. Once upon a time, in a vast and prosperous kingdom, there lived a powerful and respected king. He ruled over his land with justice and wisdom, earning the love and loyalty of his people. Despite his power and wealth, the king had one person he relied on for advice in all matters: his wise man. This wise man had served the king faithfully for many years. He was known far and wide for his calm demeanor and unshakable faith in the goodness of life. No matter what situation arose, no matter how grave or trivial, the wise man always had the same response: "It is for the best." The king valued this wise man's counsel. Whenever a problem or challenge arose, the king would turn to the wise man, who would say, "It is for the best." And the king would find comfort in those words. It helped him remain calm, trusting that things would work out for the best in the end. Over time, the king had grown to believe that the wise man's words were a deep truth about the nature of life. But one day, an event occurred that would put this belief to the test. The king, like many noblemen of his time, loved hunting. He often rode out into the forests with his men to hunt deer, boar, and other wild animals. One morning, as he was preparing for a hunt, the king called for the wise man to join him. The wise man declined, saying he had a bad feeling about the day, and that perhaps it was better for the king not to go hunting. The king, confident and eager for adventure, laughed off the wise man's caution and set out on the hunt. The sun was shining, the sky was clear, and the king felt exhilarated as he rode through the forest with his men. But fate had something else in store for him that day. As the king and his hunting party chased a deer through the dense forest, the king's horse stumbled, causing the king to fall to the ground. In the chaos of the moment, an arrow was accidentally released by one of his men, and it struck the king's hand. Injury was severe, and blood flowed freely from the wound. The king's men rushed to his side, tending to his injury as best as they could. They hurried back to the palace, where the royal doctors were summoned. The doctors tried everything they knew to heal the king's hand, but despite their efforts, the wound became infected. Day by day, the infection spread, and the doctors grew increasingly concerned for the king's health. Finally, after exhausting all other options, the doctors informed the king that they would have to amputate his hand to save his life. The king was devastated. He had always been proud of his strength and skill, especially in hunting and combat. Losing his hand felt like losing a part of himself. But there was no other choice. So the operation was performed. Afterward, King lay in his chambers, filled with sorrow and anger. He felt weak and incomplete. He summoned the wise man to his bedside and asked, "What do you think of this? I have lost my hand. What will become of me?" The wise man looked at the king with calm eyes and replied, as he always did, "It is for the best." But this time, the king could not accept those words. How could losing his hand possibly be for the best? He was frustrated and angry at the wise man's unchanging response. "How can you say such a thing?" the king demanded. "I have lost my hand. How could this be for the best?" The wise man, undeterred by the king's anger, simply repeated, "It is for the best." The king's patience snapped. In his anger, he ordered the wise man to be thrown into the dungeon. "If you cannot understand my pain, then you are no longer my wise man," the king declared. The guards took the wise man away, but as they led him to the dungeon, the wise man remained calm and said once more, "It is for the best." Time passed, and the king slowly recovered from his injury. Though he was still upset about losing his hand, life in the kingdom returned to normal. One day, feeling restless, the king decided to go on another hunting trip. He gathered his men and set out into the forest once more, determined to enjoy himself despite his missing hand. As the hunting party ventured deeper into the forest, the king became separated from his men. He wandered alone through the dense trees, trying to find his way back, but soon he realized he was lost. As he searched for a familiar path, he was suddenly surrounded by a group of wild tribesmen who lived in the forest. The tribesmen were fierce and untamed, and they quickly captured the king. The king tried to explain who he was. The tribesmen did not understand his language. They bound his hands and led him to their village, where they prepared to offer him as a sacrifice to their gods. The king was terrified. He had heard stories of the wild tribes and their brutal rituals. He pleaded with them to let him go, but they ignored his cries. They began the preparations for the sacrifice, dressing the king in ceremonial robes and placing him before an altar. But just as they were about to perform the final rites, one of the tribesmen noticed something unusual: king's missing hand. Tribe had a strict belief that only a whole, uninjured person could be offered as a sacrifice to their gods. Seeing that the king was not whole, tribesmen stopped the ritual. They believed that to offer an incomplete person would anger the gods, so they released the king and let him go free. The king could hardly believe his luck. If he had not lost his hand, he would have been killed by the tribesmen. As he made his way back to his palace, King reflected on what had happened. For the first time, he understood the truth behind the wise man's words. Losing his hand had indeed been for the best, as it had saved his life. When the king returned to the palace, he immediately ordered that the wise man be released from the dungeon. The wise man was brought before the king, and the king greeted him with a mix of gratitude and humility. "You were right," he said. "It was for the best that I lost my hand. If not for that, I would have been sacrificed by the tribesmen. But tell me, how did you stay so calm in prison? How could you say that being locked up was for the best?" The wise man smiled, his calm eyes filled with understanding. "Your Majesty," he replied, "if I had not been in prison, I would have been with you on that hunting trip. And if I had been with you, tribesmen would have taken me as well. But since I was in prison, I was safe. But you see, it was for the best." King was amazed by the wisdom of his advisor. He realized that sometimes, even in the darkest moments, there were hidden blessings that could only be seen in hindsight. From that day on, the king trusted the wise man's advice more than ever. He learned to accept life's challenges with grace, knowing that even when things seemed bad, they might still be for the best. The king and his wise man continued to live in peace and prosperity, their bond stronger than ever. The king ruled his kingdom with wisdom and kindness, always remembering the lesson he had learned: that in life, even the most difficult events could lead to something good. And so the king, the wise man, and the kingdom lived happily ever after, always believing that whatever happened, it truly was for the best.